Today is Easter, Resurrection Sunday, and I'm pumped for what God stands ready to do today. Now, the title of our Easter message is called The King's Choice. The King's Choice is the title of today's message, and I would like to introduce to you who the King is. His name is Jesus, all right? Jesus is the King, and here's the description of the King in Revelation chapter 19, verse 16. Revelation 19, it says, "On his robe and on his thigh he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords." That's his title, on his robe and on his thigh. I don't know. I assume it's the thigh of his robe. I don't know. Maybe it was just his legit thigh written on there. Either way, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. That's a weird term. We really only use that in church anymore. King of Kings, Lord of Lords. That is like the elite, like for bad grammar. He's the kingest. Okay, he's the most king, right? He's the kingest of all kings. He's the lordest of all lords. He is the top. He is above all other kings. He is above all other lords. He's the premier. Now, what that means for us, when we kind of talk through the idea of the king's choice, is that like what the king chooses sets the tone for the kingdom. In a kingdom, the king dictates what happens in his country. In his kingdom, the king sets a decree and everybody is required to follow. If you submit to him as king, you say, all right, whatever your decrees are, whatever your choices are, I follow you. And in the kingdom of God, you choose to follow him. Now, that's not how it works for us, so we may not be used to that. Everybody in this room lives in a democracy. So the goal is, which can be a little bit confusing, but the goal is for the people to decide what the president does, right? The people vote on who the president is, but that's not how, I love democracy, don't get me wrong. It is the best situation for the human condition, right? It's the best government plan for the human condition. The reason it works in the kingdom of heaven is because we have a king who is pure, who is holy, who we know is always good. The reason it can't work on earth is because power corrupts, right? We can't trust the king, that's why we do democracy. But in our kingdom, we choose to be under the king. We choose to follow Jesus as our king. We make the free will choice to follow him, and then we look to him to say, all right, if I'm going to be in your kingdom, if I'm going to follow your decrees, if I'm going to follow your choices, then your choice sets the tone for the kingdom. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Many times the choices that we make can kind of dictate who we are, right? Like we could start to ask you some questions about your life, and it would start to help me understand who you are, why you married the person you married, why you went to school where you went to school. All of the choices that you make like start to set the character of who you are, right? Like this is how you made the decision to take the promotion. This is how you chose to love your enemies. This is why you forgave. I would start to get an understanding of you if I knew your choices. Now with the king, we can understand who God is, who Jesus is, when we start to understand his choices. And what's also true is without knowing the why, without maybe digging in, some of our choices on the outside, without really knowing who you are, might sound crazy. You ever notice that? Like some people make choices and you don't know them, you're like, that sounds kind of absurd. Like it's kind of ridiculous. Like if I see you riding down the road and it's 20 degrees outside and you're on one of those little Dumb and Dumber mopeds, just driving, beep, 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 I'm going to think you made some crazy choices, right? Like I'm going to think like something happened in your life. You've lost it, maybe. I don't know, because it's 20 degrees outside. Maybe you're crazy. I don't know what happened to you, but something happened, unless maybe I got some story behind the choice. Maybe it was like you were really passionate about getting out of debt, and you said, no matter what happens in my life, I'm going to ride this moped because it's got good gas mileage, insurance is cheap, and if I wreck it, I can just buy another one. Maybe I find out like your absurd choice to ride that crazy moped down the road in 20-degree weather was really something that I understood a little deeper. I was like, oh, you're a person like of conviction. You're gonna do the hard thing even in 20-degree weather. You don't care what other people think about you riding that beep beep moped on down the street in the snow, in the ice, or whatever. You have some conviction, some tenacity, and what might seem like absurdity on the outside, when you get to know the understanding of the why behind the choice, you might understand it a little better. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of us just make absurd choices, right? Some of us are like, no, I don't know. I was just cranky and tired. I just needed a snack and I didn't do it. But sometimes we have choices that help us understand character. And sometimes the choices and even the king's choice on the outside, until you understand Easter, Resurrection Sunday, until you understand the why, the king's choice might sound absurd. right? If we can be honest. Sometimes we look at God and we look at what he did, and if you don't know the why behind it, we're like, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of absurd. Like, I'm still going to follow you because, you're Jesus. But what you did might sound absurd to us on the outside. All right, let's just play for a moment about Easter. Let's just talk about the absurdity, and let's talk about the why. Maybe if we discover the absurdity, then we can dig deep into the why, and it'll tell us more about the character of our King, and it'll set the tone for our kingdom. Okay, just Easter in and of itself, right? Easter, like, I'm not here to dog on any of our traditions because I'm going to go live them all out. Like, we're going to go right after this and my kids are going to hunt Easter eggs. But they're eggs and it's Easter. Resurrection Sunday, let me tell you what happened. Jesus rose from the dead. The grave is empty. Go find some eggs. It adds up, right? Like, it's like, that makes sense. Like, just go find some eggs. And where'd the eggs come from? There's a bunny. Like, it don't take very long in science to know bunnies don't lay eggs. We got bunnies bringing eggs. Where'd that bunny steal the eggs from? Who'd he get it from? That's what I want to know. What happened? I'm not saying my kids are going to go hunt Easter eggs. So I'm not here to dog on our traditions, but they sound absurd. It sounds ridiculous. It all adds up. It just totally makes sense. Yeah. Jesus died, resurrected. We got a bunny, we got eggs, and we celebrate, right? My favorite thing is when we have adults dress up in the Easter bunny costumes, and they're the most terrifying bunnies in history. I don't know how we took the cutest animal ever and made them terrifying. I worked at a tax agency one year around Easter time. It was like the Friday or Saturday before, and it was inside of a Walmart, and they had picture day with the Easter bunny. And it was the most boring. I was doing taxes. It was the most boring job ever. And I was sitting around waiting on people to show up, so it was even extra boring, except for this day. Easter bunny day was like, I was rolling dice to see how these kids were going to respond. It was 50-50. Every single time I was like, this kid's going to lose it. This one's going to lose it. I was just making bets with myself, by myself, having the time of my life. One kid, greatest day of his life. Sit on the Easter bunny's lap, get the picture. What's up, Easter bunny? Next kid, someone murdered him immediately. Like, he was getting stabbed in the back over and over again. There was screams in the middle of Walmart, and parents were just forcing this on this kid. Go sit in the lap. No, go do it. Just blood-curdling screams. And this is like, why are we doing that? Because Jesus rose from the dead. That's why. That's why we're doing it. That's our plan. That's what we're doing. This is like, so we can be honest, it's a little absurd. And what I thought is I was going to get to explain to you where they came from. Because I had been told and under this impression that it was like a carryover of a pagan tradition. But it's not even that clear. It's not really that clear. Like, there's a lot of obscurity on like what the symbolism might mean in the eggs and the bunny. Like the something hatching from the egg is Jesus coming out of the tomb. Did that come from the pagan tradition or a Christian tradition early on? We don't really know. Like, we don't have 100% facts. So it's kind of, oh, okay, maybe that makes sense. The bunny represents new life because bunnies like to reproduce. Hopefully your kids are in Life Kids right now. Rabbits, hopefully Life Kids is a good area for your kids. But bunnies are about new life and springtime and coming up, so that all of these things might have been pagan traditions, but they might have been new ones that we created, and now it doesn't make sense. And I think through like the absurdity of even God allowing us to have these weird traditions. Like, if something happened and we were all just wrong and Christianity didn't exist, and 2,000 years from now they were to look back at us and like they would dig up the archaeology of us and be like, we don't know what they were doing. Like, I have no idea. Bunnies, resurrections, eggs, I don't know. It's like we think that there was a bunny that died somewhere and then rose again, but it brought eggs with him. We don't really know. It would be just some crazy ideas about what we believe because of the absurdity of what Jesus let us get to in this moment that is Easter. And the real story of who Jesus is, I don't actually think gets that much like less absurd. Right? Like, you'd say, okay, that's just Easter and weird traditions that we grew into and beliefs that we've created and where they come from. We don't know, but that's weird. But like Jesus, the idea of Jesus is kind of absurd. Like, his choice and the way that God sent Jesus, if we're honest, if you hadn't been inundated with Christianity your whole life, you would acknowledge it's a little absurd. That God looked down on humanity and saw our corruptness and saw the fact that we couldn't get out of our own sin, couldn't get out of our own way. So his choice was to send his only begotten son. That's what he did. Like, hey, you can't make it on your own. I'm going to send my son. Not fix the programming, right? Because that would be like if we're on the outside looking in, like, oh, I programmed these humans wrong. I'll just do that. No. Free will matters enough that I've got to let you choose. Okay, God, that's a weird way to do it, but Fine, send your son. Send your son to teach us a better way and show us a better way. You would think that would make sense, and then it just kind of gets more weird, right? Like if we can look from the outside looking in, not inundated with Christianity our whole life, not being raised in it, it might seem strange that he sends his son not in like a palace, but in a manger. Not in like the largest country, the largest empire, the most predominant empire exists in this moment 2,000 years ago. Why 2,000 years ago? It's a great question. I don't know. Why that point in history? I don't know. But he could have sent him to be like a son of Caesar. And he would have a lot of power to show the way and show the world, a lot of authority. But he sends him to be born not in a palace, but in a manger. And not to a king, but to just some young lady who's basically insignificant in history other than giving birth to Jesus. She doesn't have some heritage that we would have all known about. We wouldn't even know who she was if it wasn't for Jesus. In a manger to a group of people who were historically not that big, not that significant. Just to the Jewish nation of for the Roman Empire, even the Jews were kind of like, these people. Right? Like these people that we got to control, these people that we got to rule. It is this small, insignificant group that really is just kind of a pain to us. It's just an annoyance. So it's like a small group in a small town, really seemingly insignificant. It sounds like an absurd choice, God. It sounds like a weird way to do what you're doing. It sounds strange. And then it doesn't get better. Like the way Jesus comes and teaches doesn't seem to like escalate to like, okay, I get it now. For me, until you know the why, it still sounds absurd. Like if you start to look at some of Jesus' teachings in the Roman Empire, when they're grabbing people and taking them to these small colosseums, because they haven't built the big colosseum yet, but they still like to see their enemies get murdered, and so they have these small colosseums that they're letting people that are enemies get destroyed. He sends Jesus to this time, and Jesus starts teaching, love your enemies, the people who want to snatch you up, the people who want to take your life, the people who actually, if you mess with them too much, they'll actually take joy out of watching you be brutally murdered by an animal or a gladiator. Love them. Nah, I'm out. Like, see it. Like, I'm not doing that if I'm in the first century. Like, these people, I'm supposed to love these people. Love your enemies. He tells them to turn the other cheek. That's not how you win wars. That's not how you fight. That's not how humanity does it. It gets more and more absurd. And then he says, carry your cross. Carry your cross. Like, the absurdity of even his teachings can seem absurd until we know the why. Carry your cross daily. Die every single day to yourself. What's happening? And then he goes, blessed are the poor. No, that's not how it works. Blessed are the hungry. Actually, I don't feel very blessed when I'm hungry. And nobody around us usually feels blessed because we're hangry, right? I don't feel blessed whenever I'm mourning. He says, blessed are you when you're weeping. I don't feel that blessed. I feel like I need some tissues, but I don't feel blessed when I'm weeping. And then he flips it on his head. It's like, woe to you who are rich. No, actually, not woe. I actually feel pretty good when I'm rich. When I got a lot of money in the bank. Not woe, Jesus. Not woe, actually. Thank you. Why don't I be blessed then? Woe to you who are full. No, that's when I'm happy. Woe to me. No, woe to you. Why are you saying these crazy things to me, Jesus? Like, woe to you who are laughing. Your own scripture says laughter does good like a medicine. What are you talking about? And my favorite absurdity is if you want to be first, you'll be last. If you want to rule, you'll serve. All of these like kind of absurd ideas that keep building on themselves in his teaching, and then the way he goes out. The way he goes out makes sense for all of us to be like, what's happening? Because even the people watching him die on the cross, are going, that doesn't make sense. There's a better way. Here's what they say in Matthew 27, verses 42 through 43. This is the people watching him die on the cross. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. I am the Son of God. Like this would be the moment where if I didn't think that you were going to do this in this absurd way, it's a great moment to prove who you are. Like to the very last moment, you wait to the last moment, and then boom, angels show up, get you off the cross. You rule the Roman Empire. It's a really cool way to show who you are, but he doesn't. That's not what he does. He dies and then comes back again to life in 3 days. And it seems like what are you doing? This is absurd. Now, for some of you, you're like, I thought it was Easter and you were like trying to help us believe in Jesus, not help us believe less in Jesus, right? And here's a funny way to look at it, at least for me, is the universe is actually absurd. If we think about like our spot in the universe and who we are and what's going on, maybe the absurdity of how it all plays out points to the fact that the universe is absurd. And maybe the absurdity is more natural than things that line up. Like we have a small blip in humanity and we want things to line up a certain way. But if you really scale out to the history of us, like things don't line up smooth. Like it's like we live in an absurd universe. Let me give you an idea of the absurdity, at least for me, the way I look at it and some facts that I heard this week. We as humans are spinning on a ball in the middle of the universe or on the outside of the universe. I don't know where the middle of the universe technically is, but we're just floating in space, spinning, right? That's a weird reality. Like we've grown up knowing it in science class, but if you really think about it, like we're on a huge ball spinning around. You know, we are spinning at the rate of 1,000 miles per hour. That's how fast we're spinning. Look it up. I'm not making this up. They're like, I can't make this up. That's how absurd it is. We are spinning at a rate of 1,000 miles per hour. That's how fast this thing is spinning, like this, right? And while we're spinning, we're going around the sun. Okay, the ball is spinning this way, and we're going around the sun. And we're going around the sun at, get this, 67,000 miles per hour is how fast us as humans, right now, we are going that speed around the sun while we're also spinning like a top. Does this sound absurd? Is it just me that this kind of thing is like, oh, maybe the universe is absurd? And then we kind of looked at the universe, and what we noticed is that things were spreading apart. Like scientists looked at the universe and said, like, things are spreading apart, which means if they were spreading apart, they must have started at one spot. And this is where we get the Big Bang Theory, that it started at one spot. And so they're like, well, if it all started at one spot, it had to have started to explode out. That's where the Big Bang comes. And that's why we're spreading apart from each other. We are spreading apart. This number boggles my mind. We are spreading apart from the rest of the universe at 163,000 miles per hour. Like our distance from other stars is moving that fast away from each other. That's how fast the explosion took place. And we're like, oh, yeah, Christianity's a fairy tale. Or maybe the idea that something started from nothing and that we're spinning at this rate around a sun at this rate, and maybe the speed at which we're spreading apart from each other is more absurd than the idea that somebody started it all. Somebody had intention, somebody had plan, and wanted to show you his grandeur when you looked out and thought, we're tiny. Like we used to think we were ants in the scale of the universe, but we're smaller than that. The larger we look out, the further we go, the more stars there are, the more absurd it is how small and insignificant we are. So it's either absurd that this random sentient beings in the middle of the galaxy came to life and could think about itself, or someone had a plan somewhere. Someone thought about something. And for me, I look at history and I look at humanity and see the absurdity of our universe and see that there's something that ties it all together. Something that makes it all make sense. Like this small group of people, the Jewish nation would produce this man who historically is there. Like there's almost nobody would argue that Jesus didn't exist. Everybody argues that Jesus was there, whether they believe he's divine or not. But there was a person named Jesus in the first century, and there are outsiders who are historians, not just the Bible, outside people that were able to see this thing take place. Two historians, Josephus and Tacitus, both see Jesus and go, something happened. I can see what took place in the Jewish nation. I can see that some crucifixion caused an uproar in the Roman Empire. There were two outsiders that saw it happen. It shouldn't even make the history books. And yet we have a whole Bible about it and pointing us to it. And the thing that ties it all for me is the reality that there was a guy that had some followers, and the followers didn't know what they were doing. Right? They were it's the point of the Gospels is to let you know Jesus' disciples don't get it. They're not understanding what's happening. They don't understand the plan. And then when he dies and raises from the dead, they are changed completely. Like the biggest point for me, the biggest moment where I'm like, ooh, Jesus did something different. Something happened is because the people that were around him changed. The people around Buddha changed slightly. The people around Muhammad changed slightly. But the disciples, no, they changed drastically. Overnight, they went from some fisherman, a tax collector, a zealot who didn't know what was going on, who weren't good enough to follow other rabbis, to people who changed the history of the world. That kind of change. When you spent 3 years around somebody, they're going to convince you to give up your life? No, only if you saw them conquer death, hell, and the grave. That's the power of the resurrection and what we see in history. And that thing that sounds so absurd is less absurd than living life without it. Is less absurd than history without it. Is less absurd than the universe without it. That God created us on purpose for a purpose. So the question that ties all this together is why? Why do it that way? Like this seems like there's better plans, better ideas. And what might make it difficult is like seeing, like you can see the action, you can kind of see something, but you don't really see it clearly, right? You can see like an image and you can see the idea of God, but sometimes it's hard to really see God, like see him at work. You see a few things, you're like, I think that's you, but why are you doing it like that? Like, I think that's you, but you're teaching, like kind of like this image. Where it's just like, I can't quite see, I can't get the whole picture. I'm trying to get the whole picture. You squint a little bit. You try to see what God's doing in your life. You try to see what God's doing through history. You try to see the point and the purpose behind the, Easter and the resurrection. You try to look and see all of like, why did you teach this? Why do you do that? And there's this scripture found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. He says, for we see now through a dim window obscurely, but then face to face. Now I know partially, but then I shall know according as I also have known. You see that image and you're looking like through a dim, obscure window and you can't quite see. And what happens in this verse and in these verses in 1 Corinthians is he's actually kind of describing the filter to help us see a little bit more clearly. Like this filter that's taking place is what I'm going to call the love filter. And you can see that image of the love filter where it slowly starts to help us see what's taking place. Because in 1 Corinthians 13, he starts to tell you what the love filter looks like. He's like, this is what it looks like. This is all what it's all about. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. Without love, his choices, his plans, his decisions don't make sense. But the filter of love helps me start to see that maybe there was a purpose. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. The more you see the choices of God through the filter of love, the glasses of love, you start to see the image of God come through more clearly and the absurdity of this choice to send his only son. The absurdity of his choice to say, love your enemies. No, I'm not just telling you to love your enemies. I'm actually going to show you how to love your enemies. And I will give up my life for you who were my enemy. I'm going to show you what it looks like to turn the other cheek. I'm going to show you what it looks like to be blessed. What it looks like to be blessed is when you are hungry, you will find the love of people who are there to feed you, and it will feed you more than your belly could have ever felt. When you find that you were blessed when you were mourning, it was because you were surrounded by people who comforted you and showed you what love really looked like, a love that you could have never experienced in the laughter. When I showed you what it looked like for you to be blessed in every situation, it was through the filter of love. And I start to see the image of God a little bit more clearly. I start to see what he did and why he did it, to show me the way of love. That's why John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him would not perish. He wanted to show you the way. The filter through which I see the absurdity of Easter, the king's choice was love, to show us love and invite us to love. To extend the hand to say, let me show you the way. And then when I return, proving that I am the way, I invite you in. I say, come follow me in the way of love. Come follow me in this crazy idea, this absurd thought of love, where I extend my hand to you and say, follow me. This is the way. This is the direction. This is the call. The way of love. And for some of us, it's like, oh, love, it's kind of like hippie comfort, live and let live. And love is the opposite. Love is you find people that are drowning in the river of life and you do everything you can, even sacrifice your own life to pull them out. Not just in that moment, but every day. Every day you spend time learning to swim a little better so you can pull somebody else out of the river. Love is not live and let live. Love is sacrifice and serving. And he showed us the way of love, and it cost him everything. And when he shows us the way of love and he invites us to this place, he says, it costs you everything. The way of love means all of your plans, all of your desires, all of your dreams, every way you deal with your family, everything you think about. He says the king's choice is the way of love. If you want to be in my kingdom, come follow. It'll cost you everything. It will cost you your life. It'll cost you days of your week. It'll cost you time in prayer. It'll cost you studying. It'll cost you everything. But the way of love, the sacrifice of love, takes you out of the grave of your own self-preservation and sets you free. And find out that nothing can kill you, because the way of love is resurrection. The way of love is real life. And see, I think maybe the absurdity, maybe more absurd than anything Jesus ever done, or the way that he did it, the way that I wouldn't do it, all of those things. I think what's more absurd about us as Christians is that we know the way of love. We've seen Jesus. We felt the invite. We accepted the invite. And for some of us today, what I'm challenging you to do this Easter in the way of love is, after you've accepted the invite, live like it's true. Because the absurdity would be to accept the invite, follow Jesus, and live your life like it's not true. And that's what we do. Some of us come only on Easter, and we show up. Sometimes we come 5 or 6 times a year, and sometimes out in public we love people every once in a while. And Jesus is like, that's not how it works. We don't get to pick and choose how and when we love. He said at all times, in every situation, love. It is everything. It is the way. You will have to sacrifice. You will have to give up time, money, energy, all of those things to follow my way. And the absurdity would be to come and say, Jesus, I follow you, and then go home and not follow the king's choice. Because the king's choice says, it'll cost you everything. Carry your cross. You'll learn to serve. You'll learn to love. You'll learn to be set free. Today, choose the way of love. It's the kingdom of this world that is like live and let live, or a dog eat dog. That's the kingdom of this world. The kingdom of heaven says, come and love. Let me show you how to love. It'll drive out fear. You'll have conversations you didn't think you had the guts to have, because real love drives out fear. And you'll have a conversation with somebody that you love that will be a hard conversation. But because you love them more than you care about their perception of you, you'll have the hard conversation, because that's what love does. Love sacrifices. Love might cost you everything, but Jesus says, come find the way of love. The king's choice was to live a sacrificial life full of love. He sent his only son so that we could see the way, find the way, follow the way, and find real life. Not the way the world works, but the way the kingdom of heaven works. There was a way of love. It costs you everything, but in return, it'll give you eternal life. There's another way that Hebrews says it. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, he says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. He endured all the pain, all the suffering for a joy that was on the other side, the victory on the other side. The reason you run that marathon is for that finish line. The reason that you'll put in extra work is for the pay at the other side. And for the other side, there was a joy. There was something on the other side. And the king's choice was you. You were the joy that was set before him. The joy on the other side of the cross was making a way for you to know him for eternity. You were the joy that was set before him. That's the king's choice. The king's choice has been you, and it's always been you. That's why he sent his only begotten son. For you, for me. While we were lost in our sin, while we were struggling, it's absurd to think that the God of the universe loves us that much. And yet it's the truth. While we were lost, while we were struggling, he found a way for us, made a way for us, and said, this was the joy. I'll suffer the cross. I'll suffer pain. I'll suffer all the struggling, because I want to know you on the other side. I want to know you for eternity. I want you to see the freedom that is found in following the way of love. Find out that the God of the universe loves you that much. And this Easter, my prayer for you is that you choose his way. Not yours, not the world's. But you find out that this thing that might sound so absurd is the very thing that's true. And it's the way of love. It's the way of the cross. And it's the way that leads to resurrection. Let's pray.